few weeks, and an area that we haven't hit on, and I would say is really relevant for most people, is going to be insulin resistance, androgen excess, and ovulation. So I wanted to walk through just some basic things with blood sugar and how it impacts the body. So I have some slides and I'm going to run through them, but some things that I see quite a bit is I'd be curious if anybody's, had a provider ever tell them that, their blood sugar is borderline, but never getting really much of an explanation on that. I see that quite a bit with clients is, they may get some basic blood work, a A1C or a glucose, and, it's kind of creeping upwards, but no interventions are really done. And I think that's a disservice, honestly. I think it's important for us to be preventative with our health. And, I want to kind of walk through the impacts of irregularities to blood sugar and insulin and how that can impact the body. So let's do this. So some of the things that I think are important to look at with insulin resistance and hormones, I think everybody thinks about insulin as, the hormone that regulates blood sugar. And when insulin's working normally, it does that. It moves sugar into the cell for energy. What happens when we have prolonged issues with elevations in insulin? Cells stop responding. So that's a fancy term for basically you eat something or you have some sort of stress response, and your muscle cells are unable to uptake glucose. So muscle cells open up and blood sugar goes in, and that fuels our muscles and our brain and our heart and lots of processes in the body. With insulin resistance, basically, I like to think of that as a gate, and that gate will not open. So we're not able to get sugar into the cell. That gate stays closed. Blood sugar elevates, insulin elevates. When we look at high insulin over time, it is a hormonal disruptor. So it's not just a sugar issue. And I think a lot of times we correlate that just to, our body's inability to use glucose. So going into some of the things with insulin in the ovaries. And what you'll see a lot is you have different cells in your ovaries, and um, theca cells are one of the specifics in the ovaries. And the theca cells will respond to LH. So your cells basically make androgens like testosterone, androstenedione, DHEA. High insulin amplifies LH signaling. So if you've done blood work with us, we look at LH and FSH, and sometimes we may see a disproportionate amount of LH. Sometimes that can cause excess androgen productions, which can lead to acne, hair loss, PCOS or PCOS symptoms. I see a lot of women coming through the program talking about a diagnosis with PCOS, but no clear-cut answer on that. So insulin is a piece of that story for some women with PCOS. Um, but I don't think a lot of people know that insulin basically talks to the ovaries, and it's a lot more than just blood sugar and energy. It will change your androgen levels. So, I think that probably someone on this call or coaches, if you've ever had a client or dealt with some of these issues yourself, if a lot of times practitioners will say it's genetic and there is a component, but we also want to look at all the other lifestyle pieces associated with that. Um, Looking at kind of a diagram of this. So insulin plus LH, the theca cells and androgens, just to kind of get an understanding of what that looks like and how all of this ties together. Um, and if we look at insulin resistance and inovulation, a lot of women wanting to conceive, this can be a piece of that puzzle. So you have just like your LH, you have FSH, and these are signaling hormones from your brain to your ovaries. And FSH basically maturizes follicles and causes ovulation. So you build your corpus luteum every month. If you are premenopausal, that's basically the sheath that comes up and will protect an egg if it's fertilized. If it's not, then every month you break that down and you bleed that out. Progesterone's a driver of that. So in insulin resistance, it disrupts FSH and follicles stall. So you're unable to make a mature follicle. Um, when the follicle doesn't rupture, there's no ovulation. So no ovulation, no progesterone. I also would say that that's something we see quite a bit for, I would say like 90% of women coming in here is very, very low levels of progesterone. Now, insulin is a piece of the story, but it's not the whole puzzle, but it's something to be aware of and educate yourself on, just to get an understanding. Ovulation isn't just about fertility, it's on how you make progesterone. And if there's no corpus luteum because there's no progesterone, that's going to disrupt your cycle. Other things that you could potentially think about with irregular cycles would be PMS, anxiety, sleep disorders. A lot of those things could be, signs of hidden inovulation and just the body's inability to um, have a cycle monthly, a normal cycle. And cycles are definitely a sign of health. So I like to think about it's probably very inconvenient to have that monthly. But at the same time, it does show that your body is mechanics are working appropriately. Let's see. And here is some graphics on follicle stimulating hormone and ovulation and the corpus luteum. So insulin basically disrupts all of these processes. And then just like cycle consequences, high androgens plus low progesterone is hormonal chaos. So symptoms, kind of what I spoke about earlier, irregular absent cycles, PMS, anxiety, mood swings, infertility, miscarriage risk, weight gain, and estrogen dominance. Um, Coaches, would you say like this is something, maybe not from the fertility standpoint, but do you see a lot of these symptoms present with your clients? And a number is probably hard to go off of, but is this something that you see quite a bit? Is the irregular cycles, PMS, anxiety? Do most of your clients come in with issues like this?
I have a few. I think a lot of the women I work with are past period stages or majority, or maybe it's like 60% are, 40% are. I can't, haven't really quite figured it out, but I think more are past that I work with. Just a couple have it, and they do present those pretty consistently.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with Charlotte. Actually, I have a client who recently came off of her birth control, and I think she came off of it in April, if I'm correct. She can correct me. Um, but she came off in April, and so she's just now getting some spotting and stuff like that. Is that normal when you're coming off? She's also maybe she's getting her second round of blood work done. Also questioning maybe she's going into perimenopause. So yeah, I'm not sure what you would say around all of that.
It could definitely be a combination of both. I think that the longer you stay on human birth control, the more irregularities your cycles could present. And it's definitely case by case. I think if you factor age on top of that, can make it really confusing or difficult to figure out. Say giving enough time to see if the cycle does come back would be my recommendation. And then having that second test of labs would be helpful. If
Okay.
first test was
Yeah.
on birth control and the second's off, you could probably get some good data on what's happening.
I believe the first test she did, she had like just come off of it. So now it's been 6 months where she's been off of it, taking the supplements, changing changes in diet. It's been down a decent amount of weight as well. So, um, yeah,
I think all of those things would definitely be helpful to bring that cycle back. I think the other piece is just the age component, depending if she's, in her early 30s, 40s, 50s,
she's in early 40s, I believe. Exact age. Un segundo. Where? 42.
42.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say um, it depends on a lot of things, but that would be an age where potentially you could see some changes in cycle due to perimenopause. So be interesting to see how things shake out for her in future months.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you'll have a call with her soon too.
I know I'm a little behind on calls. Clients
Yeah.
who are here, I will be catching up this week. Well, thank you for your inputs on that. Um, other things that I think about in regards to, oh, I got a question here. Let's see. I'll call it monthly. Okay, it's you. Yeah, it is a health report card for sure, Sophie. Um, some things like stats, 70% of women with PCOS have insulin resistance, but you don't need PCOS for insulin resistance to impact your hormones. Again, I always talk about this more on a spectrum. So it is a piece of the puzzle, but I would say it's one of the most important pieces for us to track as we age. Insulin resistance, elevations in blood sugar is an inflammatory process. So it is going to impact your sex hormones. It's also going to impact your risk for cardiovascular disease and other inflammatory disorders. So, um, I think of blood sugar and insulin being a driver for hormonal disruption. Looking at a diagram, it's kind of just like what we talked about with thyroid and cortisol. Everything is interconnected in the body. So, insulin resistance is going to drive up things like excess androgens, which can create issues with ovulation, low progesterone, and then we have the abnormalities with the cycle. So, um, the good news is with insulin resistance, it can be reversed. And, I think a lot of people get to a point where they think that it's not reversible. I would say if you're type 1 diabetic and you rely on insulin at that point, it's a different story. But if you're pre-diabetic or type 2 diabetic, you can really make some improvements with this. Things that I think a lot about when we look at things to help with improving glucose and insulin. Biggest thing, in my opinion, is going to be sleep, stress management. If we're unable to stay asleep throughout the night, our body's ability to regulate blood sugar does change quite a bit. We tend to see higher levels of blood sugar in the morning, and then the postprandial. So after you eat, you may see some changes in that. But small changes definitely add up. Other things that I think quite a bit about would be movement. So I was talking about glucose being food for the cell. When you exercise, you upregulate that process. So as you do resistance training, your body's ability to regulate blood sugar goes up quite a bit. So if someone has insulin resistance and they're not doing any sort of exercise, getting your body to start moving is going to improve that response. And that doesn't cost any money. It's just a little bit of time. So resistance training is going to be a pretty big piece of that. Um, Coaches, what else am I missing maybe from like a movement or lifestyle or maybe recommendations around food? I know there's caveats from for person to person, but um, Would love some input on that.
A few things to add on to what you said was working on the terrain theory. Like, obviously, food will help a lot with cleaning out the liver and the colon. But if you clean up the terrain, then you'll have less toxins being able to sit there and create also higher inflammation markers, higher cortisol markers that increase insulin. And if you have a cleaner colon and a cleaner liver, you're gonna have more bile and you're gonna have a cleaner colon that actually have more sensitive insulin receptors too. So we're talking parasites, mold, pesticides, chemicals, all that. So just cleaning up your environment too, cleaning up your inner environment too, with food and exercise is really key. And then if you want to go down a little bit more advanced detox stuff, that's also helpful too. But you really do have to have the basic things Justin said is food, movement, sleep, clean water, and start there for a while. And if you still don't see an improvement, then it may be time to go to more advanced protocols or detox support so that you can help your body clean up the terrain on the inside that's affecting your high insulin levels.
I think it's interesting with the type 2 diabetes conversation, Charlotte. I do see a lot of people talking about hormonal disruptors or environmental toxins really driving up that process as well. And I think you made a really good point. We have those receptors all over the body. So being able to get those organs moving in the right direction is quite helpful. You know, glucose is essential to keep us breathing and keep our brains working, but in excess it is a problem. So I really like the detox piece on that. What else? What else am I missing? I'm a little foggy today.
Um,
Forgot to mention heavy metals too. Done.
Um, I was just thinking of things just in general that are like impacting the insulin resistance. And so just, I mean, I could talk about any of these a lot, but just kind of ticking off boxes that there'll be some crossover. But like, I think of like chronic stress and cortisol in general. So like, elevated cortisol increases gluconeogenesis. And so ultimately stress can reduce insulin receptor sensitivity. So, and I mean, if y'all know me at all, I'm big on stress and how it impacts everything in the body. So, and then from a gut standpoint, if you have overgrowth in the gut, those lipopolysaccharides leaking into circulation, creating inflammation that also can impair insulin signaling. So, another one of my main areas, but just gut overgrowth can definitely influence insulin sensitivity. Um, as I think just from an energy, like mitochondrial dysfunction sort of thing, and just like how that impaired energy process can really impact the like muscle glucose uptake and insulin resistance. And so, I mean, I know this is really trendy right now, but that like red light therapy is important. And then like just, working out is also good for your mitochondria. I then think about like micronutrients too, that have a big impact on how well that process and insulin, glucose, and insulin receptors work. So some of like magnesium and vitamin D and B vitamins and zinc, a lot of things that really help there. And I know that gets in the nitty gritty, but I don't know if you don't want to do micronutrient testing and stuff like that. Like eating the rainbow is still a really good option, and probably missed in a lot of people. I know Charlotte kind of talked about. I feel like toxins definitely. And even sleep. Again, big buckets, I think, influence a lot of things. Like your circadian rhythm and sleep have a big impact on how well you process glucose and insulin too. So, yeah, anyway, never mind.
That was great. Yeah, hit a lot of really good points there. Lisa, I see you have your hand raised. Um, Go ahead.
Oh, me, Lisa? Or
Other Lisa, I'm sorry. Lisa.
oh, okay. If you want, you can answer Dina's question first. This kind of circles back to a little bit of what Ashley was saying. I have a lot of clients that I'm talking to who are dealing with quite a bit of stress in their life, like extended years of stress, like one thing after another, after another, after another. And so I've had some questions on what are some good ways that we can manage our stress to keep the cortisol down so that then we're able to, stay healthy, drop that weight. Some things that are implemented, I guess, regular tools that you girls use as coaches to keep your clients' stressors down so I can put that in as well. Answering their questions, I guess better. So if you want to talk about that, I'd love to hear about that.
I'll go first, mostly because I feel really passionate about this. Um, but I don't I think it's not an easy, quick fix thing by any stretch. Not that any of this is. But I will say stress is probably one of the most intangible things to help your body learn how to process stress instead of hold it. And Lisa, in general, like talking with people about it, in my experience, like you can tell them all the tools, but that is something that I feel like we work a lot on as coaches and like guiding them through it and reminding them and supporting them through some of that, versus just telling them to do it sort of. And that's probably true for a lot of things, but just like I talk about stress relief or processing stress like a muscle. It is not something that you can go and meditate for 10 minutes and then, oh, I'm burning fat now. Like I did it once and it was great. And I also feel like meditating one time, and I know that's not what you're saying. I'm just saying in general, like one day of meditation is also sometimes painful and not easy and whatever. So, I often give people a long list of things to try or have them create a list of things to try. I will write off some really like non-rocket science sort of things. Meditation is one of my favorite, also one of the hardest to break into, but meditation, deep breathing, underrated. I think breathing techniques are one of the best things. You can do it anywhere. You don't need a tool. You can do it while somebody's screaming at you. Like one of the best things you can do. And I actually think there's a lot in breath work and like different tools to that and different breathing techniques that I find extremely useful. Just to throw one out, especially in high stress, I really like the 4-7-8. So breathe in for 4, hold for 7, out for 8. A longer exhale automatically tells your body that you're not being attacked by a bear. And so modern day stress is literally like the same as a saber-toothed tiger, jumping at you. Modern day stress of like relationships at work do the same thing internally. But if you can breathe out longer and do that for a solid 2 minutes, it regulates your heart rate and your breathing and it like your somatic nervous system. And so that is a very powerful, easy, quick tool. I think of yoga and bubble baths and grounding, going and standing in the grass with your feet barefoot or whatever. But I will say, and I say this a lot to people, I do think it needs to be intentional, not like, yeah, I stood in the grass for 5 minutes, but I was on the phone with a client or whatever, or, meditated while cooking or something, listen to a meditation. I don't think that's as helpful. But sitting still and sitting with emotions, processing emotions, journaling is another good option. Therapy is another good option. But anyway, anything to help process the things and even sitting with emotions, I think is really hard to do, but sitting with them versus like shoving them under the rug and or whatever. So yeah, anyway, in my experience, finding and I always tell people like make a list of things and try it. And it's not going to be perfect the first time or the third time. I would say pick a couple of things to try over and over and over and be able to surrender to it. And I think that's one of the hardest things. Like, okay, you can like listen to a guided meditation every morning for 5 minutes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you were like really present to it. And so I think that's where some of the work is. And, trying a couple of things and trying it over and over until you build that muscle, until your body starts to know you know what? Oh my gosh, I had a really stressful day, but I know that I can like breathe through this and release this, and that she's gonna meditate and guide through it. So I do think not only mentally but like psycho-emotionally, I think that it is like building a muscle to be able to train the body to release it. And then I'm gonna say one other thing because I think 99.9% of the time when I ask people what they do for stress relief, they say exercise. And while, yes, over time, exercise helps lower cortisol in the moment, it actually raises cortisol in the moment. And so, while that is still good for the body and can be a really good release, that is not what I would want everyone to have a calm stress reliever. So, a breathing, a meditation, a yoga, a bubble bath, something that we're sitting that we're allowing the cortisol to go down in that moment because there's a better like neuro connection to releasing stress while cortisol is going down. Um, anyway, I will quit jabbering on, but there's my 2 cents on that.
All good points.
I can add on top of that too. I think a lot of the time the word stress is overgeneralized, and some people use the word stress for a lot of areas in their life. And like it's very interesting that I think it's over 3,000 words for emotions in the whole entire language, and people usually use like eight of them. So then what happens is that we just say, oh, this is very stressful. Seeing, like, I'm sure that you know somebody in your life, right, that never got stressed out about anything, right? They're like, oh, you're like so calm. What's going on? Like, yeah, this is happening, but we'll figure it out. And then there's somebody over there that got stressed out about the spilled milk on the table. This is happening, this is going on, and just everything is stressful. And when you start to label everything as stressful, or even me just thinking about it, sometimes I get stressed, right? But like when you start to label everything in your life as stressful, like really just starting to realize like what are the things that are actually causing you stress in your life. And then there's also something called an emotional home that we always tend to go back to an emotion that we tend to live in. I used to have a client that well, on her first call, she just told me that she was always stressed. And then I was like, oh, interesting. And then on the second call, I noticed that. Third call, I noticed that. And then I asked her one day, I'm like, what exactly are you stressed about? And she just kind of took a second. She's like, I don't know. And and I was like, okay, let's talk about that a little bit more. And the thing is that our body, like we become so used to living in a certain state that we do it based on the way that we're talking. And you start talking super fast and you start talking like this, and it's like, oh my gosh, Sophia, this happened, then da, da, da. Like I always tell them, I'm like, slow down, take a breath, speak slower. And immediately, like you start to feel calmer. I know other things too that can help you out is just like instead of trying to go through the motions constantly, like take a step back and really like enjoy the process of what you're doing. If you're cooking, then cook, right? If you're doing your work, then work. But really just noticing the words and the language that you use constantly to define emotions or things that you are feeling, of saying, okay, yes, I do have to do these things, but how can I figure it out? I am one of those people. I used to get stressed out a lot of the time, like especially school. I would cry over every single test that I had. Like it's just everything. And then I just started realizing like none of this is helping me. Like the stress doesn't help me. And I just started to realize like things always work out. Things, no matter what happens in life, a lot of things have happened in life, is it's never not worked out. And when I started to realize that, I became a lot calmer and I started to find solutions. You will never find a solution in a stressful state, in a sad state, or an angry state, in one of those emotions that brings more negativity per se, versus you have to come out of that state in order to find a solution. So really, in terms of that stress, it's how often are you using that word? How often are you defining things to be stressful? Is that really something that's stressful, or is that just an inconvenience? But I think that could be something really helpful to just really realize, is this something that I constantly define situations as, or is this just inconvenient right now? Can I figure this out? So yeah.
Very good. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's a different perspective for sure. I think being able to think about those emotions and being able to, I think even just the labels, having different labels for stuff is something I've never really thought of. So I think that's really cool.
I think too that for me, it's great to have all these details of what is being implemented with each of our clients. You know, this isn't just some weight training. This isn't just some nutrition training, right? We're getting a whole lifestyle here so that we're truly able to accomplish our goals, even down to the nitty gritty when the daily grind of stress flows into our life. And they're big things usually. It's not just small little things. They're big major things that are impacting our clients' lives every day. So thank you girls for sharing that. Much appreciated.
I had one thing I was going to add. I feel like all the coaches said things really like I'm probably repeating, but I mean, I always like to identify what's the stressor because again, like even what Sophie said, we like blanket statement it, so is it people, relationships? Like some people have really bad boundaries with certain people, like you have maybe toxic people in your life. Maybe you are caring for aging parents, or, maybe you got kids. Like, what is the actual stressor? Identifying it, like, do you work long hours at work? Do you always say yes to everything? Do you overextend yourself? The more I know what it is that's a chronic stressor, the easier I can help guide through it because then it could be just like, oh, you're a yes person, okay, like let's practice more about boundaries because, you know, all those other tactics super helpful, going for a walk or, just like meditating. But if we're still always like doing those habits are still there, or still like letting people or habits infiltrate our life, like we're just always going to be overextended. And every woman that I talk to is busy. We're all so busy, overscheduled, really busy, like, trying to do 50 tasks at once and, waking up early, going to sleep late. It's just really the whole thing. So it's like, are you getting sleep? Are you chronically rushing? I can raise my hand and say, like, I still have to tell myself to slow down. Like, I'm just, I walk fast, I do things. Like, I have to just say, like, what is the rush? It's okay. Do I leave enough time for myself? And then, there's other things like perfectionism, self-criticism. Do you ever feel like you're enough? I feel like those really come into play too. It's just like you just always feel like, maybe I'm not living up to what I think I should be. That's a stressor as well. So I think it's just like looking at all of that, just all of that, how that goes into play and identifying it first. And then we can kind of look at, okay, what would be the best thing for this person? What's going to work with them? Like all the other coaches were saying, like meditation, journaling, walking, just I love this. I just like close my laptop, I shut the lights off, even in between calls. I'm like, oh my God, I just need a minute just to like get grounded, just to feel like I'm not just going from one task to the other. I'm not just like a go, go, go. Like I'm a human being, not a human doing. So, just finding stillness, even in the midst of chaos, like just trying to fit that in. I think that's helpful. So,
I think the mental side of things is a huge piece of healing and figuring stuff out as we can do fancy protocols and take all the supplements and pharmaceuticals, but if we're not really working on these areas that all of you've talked about, I really feel like healing will not happen or it's going to take twice as long. So I really loved everything that you said. Now I'm gonna ask Charlotte because she placed some stuff here in the chat. Maybe we can get a little bit more into some of these specific things in regards to some of the metal, parasites, mold, mild toxins. And have you had any application yourself with this and seen changes, Charlotte, or with clients? Um, that's more of your forte. I'm starting my first liver detox. I started it yesterday morning. But this is something that you're much better at. And you had a huge influence on that. So I'm going to say that. I was talking to Davey this morning. He's like, oh, it sounds like something Charlotte did. And I was like, yeah, she had a lot of influence on this. I'd love to hear your take on this and then maybe some practical experience with that.
Sure. It's an ever-evolving learning curve for me as well. I think the one that I have most experience with is parasite infections. I'll talk about myself. Definitely, I've always had a higher A1C, and I'll always be very fluctuating in weight. So once I worked with liver and colon, that helped a lot, but also parasite cleansing. I definitely feel like I'm able to maintain, I can fast longer, I have more balance in my life, and I feel better, and my periods are, they're still a little bit up and down, but they're trending better. So a lot of the parasitical herbs that I've taken have helped a lot with both of those facets, and I'm able to maintain less water weight retention, better blood sugars, and all that stuff. So heavy metals, definitely they are a thing because when I did a parasite cleanse, you do release heavy metals from the parasites. So that's why you got to take a lot of binders when you do a parasite cleanse. And definitely had residual effects of that with cognitive issues. I couldn't speak to blood sugar directly, but I did receive a lot of cognitive issues after. And I worked a lot with the nanozeolites and different things to help mop up where I had overdone or where my liver couldn't handle the amount of die-off that I had created. So it's a very up and down process. This is just throwing it out there. With all of these things, like they can be issues if you've never addressed it, but the little that I have done with myself and taking other clients through liver, colon, and parasite cleansing, they all see a benefit and a trend towards cognitive function is better. Hey, I can last longer, or hey, I have less hunger cravings, or hey, I sleep better or a lot of different benefits that are not specifically like my A1C went down, but all of these other benefits that go along with the trend of A1C can come down the more you clean up the terrain and the more you work on it. The thing to remember here is it's never one and done. It is a continual work in progress until you see these layers peeled off over time, along with good diet, exercise, and food. So, I know that my A1C is definitely improved just from parasite cleansing, and that indirectly is heavy metals. Now, I don't have an issue with mold, so that's a whole nother area that I'm throwing out there, but I'm not an expert in. I'd say I've definitely dabbled more in the parasite and heavy metals thing. So, um, there's a whole host of symptoms that you, if someone's with a severe case of mold, you may readily know that because you have severe weight loss resistance, and I have seen that before with a lot of people dealing with like a lot of mold toxicity and the weight loss resistance is there with that. But they have a lot of issues that are chronic too. So I don't know if I was all over the place, but it's definitely something worth to consider that we all have a certain level of parasites, we all have a certain level of heavy metals, and possibly some lighter levels of mold. Um, so it's worth to learn how to detox from these things if you are dealing with, gosh, like I'm kind of low carb and my A1C is still high, like I cannot get that lower. So then I think it's worth to take a look in this direction and start applying that and learning it.
Helpful, absolutely. So what I'm gathering is a consensus from all of you. It's multifaceted. It's not one thing, and there's lots of things to look at. So yeah, I love all that. I don't want to miss our question here. So for A1C, Dina, you asked, what do you consider the marker to start being worried in would be near the standard of 5, 6 marker? Are most people near the lower or mid number? I would say it's up and down. I see all kinds of numbers. Um, some chronically high over 5.7, and then I've seen some clients come in here with 4.7, 4.8. In my opinion, I would say somewhere around 5.3 just shows that things may be starting to become dysfunctional. So, well within the range, but potentially some issues. Why we look at an insulin is sometimes plasma insulin will be really high in the background, and that's pulling down that A1C and your glucose. I've seen glucose is in the 80, and then I see a insulin of like 21, and a lot of times your pancreas is shelling out so much insulin to counteract that. Um, that's where I would get more specific with clients and ask them questions around if they have hypoglycemia. So a lot of times if you go prolonged periods without eating or you try fasting, you may get weak and shaky or dizzy. A lot of times we can have reactive hypoglycemia. So say we eat something heavy in carbohydrates and our insulin has to raise even higher to counter that, then our blood sugar drops. So I can see it kind of vary across the spectrum on numbers. I would say a lot of it's going to be in conjunction with other things. Usually, if I see A1C high and insulin high, your C-reactive protein's probably high. Your LDLs are probably elevated. Your ApoB is probably elevated. So, what I always like to tell everybody is it's all interconnected. And as soon as one thing starts to become dysfunctional, it will start to see trends in other markers. We use that alongside symptoms and current lifestyle and come up with a plan. So I would say it just depends. I wish I could give you a direct answer, but there's so much nuance with this. Um, I think a lot of it's just going to depend on where you're at in your health status. But rough numbers, I would say maybe around a 5'3", you're starting to see some dysfunction. Now, primary care office and general practitioners, they're not really going to start to hoot and holler till you're, 5'7", 5'8", and then at that point, there's severe glucose and insulin resistance, and it's an uphill battle to improve that. So I always like to start as early as possible and try to prevent as much as I can. I tend to have a lot of issues with my glucose and insulin. And that's going to segue me into my last point. I'm sure some people are curious on, well, what can I do from a supplement standpoint? I think everybody loves supplements and basic things. Fiber is probably the easiest and least expensive, and we can get that from food. Fiber is really going to help regulate blood sugar, um, you know, based off of digestive capabilities. I like upwards 25 to 35. Again, that's going to be based off of individual response. If you eat 5 grams of fiber a day, you don't want to go to 35, but maybe working your way up. Um, Inositol is great. Berberine is something that I recommend to a lot of clients. Berberine can be hard on the stomach, so there's other things you could use. Alpha lipoic acid. Um, Chromium is quite helpful. Those are some of my personal favorites. And then if someone has severe issues regulating blood sugar, I take a pharmaceutical metformin. I have for years. My mom's diabetic. My insulin runs high. I just got done doing a very hard diet. My insulin was still a 10, so it was borderline, and I was very, very in shape for that. So it's odd to see a number so high for somebody with such low body composition. So that's a genetic thing for me. So metformin is helpful. The controversial GLPs are helpful, just giving broad stroke things that are beneficial. And then even into Ashley hit on mitochondria. So mitochondrial peptides are also going to help improve and regulate blood sugar. So there's a vast toolbox of things someone can use. But those things are not going to be helpful if you don't go back and look at root causes. All of the things the coaches talked about, that's going to have the most impact in conjunction with over-the-counter or pharmaceutical intervention. But just going for the pharmaceutical route is not always going to be the best course of action if we haven't addressed the other pieces. Let's see. Megan said, sky breathing technique is scientifically researched technique that reduces cortisol level. I can attest to breathing techniques. It's something that I implement quite a bit. I really like utilizing those kind of based off of how stressed I am. Um, Cheap, and like Ashley said, you can do them anywhere. I wanted to stop here and see if any clients had any additional questions for us. We have about 10 minutes left here. Happy to answer any additional questions. All right. Well, I want to thank everybody for joining the Hormone Happy Hour. If no one has any additional questions for us, I will wrap this up. I will get the recording over so we can get it uploaded for clients who could not attend. And I appreciate everybody spending some time with us today.
Thank you, Justin.
Thank you.
Have a great
Thank
day.
Bye,
you.
everybody. Take care.
Bye.